Okay, I think we're going to get started. My name is Hillary Taylor. I'm a planner here at the City of Helena. I'm joined this evening by Lucy Morel-Gingler.
Hello.
And we are presenting this evening via Zoom. So it looks like we have a couple of participants. I'm glad you're able to join us. I know that there are other things going on this evening. So thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Stephanie, if we can have you advance to the first slide. We are this evening talking about updates to the zoning use chart and definitions. Next slide, please. So thank you for your participation. We are glad you are here. Just some general housekeeping process points. Please keep your microphone on mute until identified by the host. You'll be able to raise your hand in the Zoom feature. You can look for that feature right now if you'd like to be acknowledged by the host. The host will, when you raise your hand, the host will acknowledge you and lower your hand, and we'll make note that you'd like to speak. Or you can use the chat feature during the meeting if you have a question or a comment. Next slide, please. So our goals for this evening is to present the proposed changes to the land use chart and definitions, and to solicit comments and concerns from stakeholders and the public. Next slide. We are going to discuss the land use chart this evening and the definitions. Both the land use chart and the definitions come from the growth policy and how it relates to zoning. Next slide. So we have a quick slide here about what is the growth policy. The growth policy is a vision document that provides direction for implementation of future land use policy for the City of Helena. The growth policy is made up of different chapters and addresses issues such as affordable housing, sustainability, and annexation policy. The proposed update to the land use chart and the definitions seeks to eliminate regulatory barriers to the future land use policy. Next slide, please. Are there any questions on the growth policy as it relates to zoning? We'll just look and see if we got anything in the chat room. Okay.
Is someone raising their hand?
Did anybody raise their hand?
Nope, looks like we are good to go.
Okay. If any questions come up about the growth policy as it relates to zoning, you can go ahead and put those in the chat feature and we'll address them as they come up. Next slide, please. So what is zoning? Each parcel in the City of Helena is in an associated zoning district. The zoning districts show up as colors on the map shown here. The different colors represent different zoning districts, such as the R1, the B2, which is our commercial zoning district, or the CLM, which stands for the commercial light manufacturing zoning district. And zoning determines setbacks, height, lot coverage, other density considerations, and allowed uses. Next slide, please. Are there any questions on zoning? Okay, again, you can, if you have questions that come up as the meeting goes on and progresses, you can always use that chat feature, which should be a feature somewhere at the bottom of your screen that you can click on and use. Next slide, please. So the public process that we've been through thus far, on February 11th, the Helena Zoning Commission held a work session to do a comprehensive review of the definitions that can be found in various chapters in Title 11. Specifically, this work session addressed definitions found in 14 different chapters in Title 11 of the Helena City Code. On April 14th, 2020, the City of Helena Zoning Commission received an update by email on staff work to begin a comprehensive review of the definitions that can be found in the various chapters in Title 11. Additionally, the Zoning Commission received a copy of the land use table that had preliminary edits proposed by staff. The materials for both meetings were posted online at the following link, which was at helenamt.gov the Community Development Department, and the the current projects link. The Zoning Commission has not met since February due to the restrictions associated with COVID-19. And an email was sent to stakeholders on July 10th, 2020, inviting them to participate in the Zoom call this evening. Next slide, please. Comments and participation. This presentation highlights the significant changes proposed to the land use chart and the definitions. Other changes are proposed as well. Please see the current projects links for the comprehensive changes proposed. We will invite you to make comments at the end of the presentation, and we do want to know if you have any issues or questions regarding the proposed changes. So please feel free to use that chat feature to let us know if you have any comments or an issue. Additionally, like I've said before, you can raise your hand and the host will acknowledge you. Next slide, please. A brief overview of the presentation this evening. We're talking about Title 11 of the City Code of Helena. There are 41 chapters in Title 11, and currently there are definitions in each chapter. The proposal is to move all the definitions to one chapter, and this was discussed at the February Zoning Commission meeting. The land use chart needs updates due to societal changes, and the proposed changes make the chart easier. The proposed changes may make the chart easier for the public to use and understand. The last complete revision was done in 2008. The Zoning Commission and staff have been working on the land use chart over the past couple of months and would like feedback on the proposed changes. Next slide, please. So our goals for the definitions, proposed definitions chapter are, first, please see the following link for the proposed definition chapter. Again, it can be found under the current projects link under the community development page on the Helena MT government webpage. The proposed changes come from the Zoning Commission meeting back in February. And so we've got several definitions that are proposed to be revised, and all of the definitions are proposed to be moved to one chapter. The goals of updating the definitions are to provide consistency by making sure that the definitions agree, which will be easier if they're in one location, and also to refresh and update the language in the definitions to make sure that they are current and clear. Next slide, please. So we will also be discussing this evening the zoning use chart. The zoning use chart can be found online. The easiest way to get there is to go to the City of Helena webpage, helenamt.gov, and then just to click on the link for the city code, which is immediately in the taskbar on the page. The website is also found here on the PowerPoint presentation. The proposed changes to the zoning use chart can be found online as well. Also at the helenamt.gov page, the community development current projects page. In the next few slides, staff will present many of the significant changes that are proposed to the zoning use chart. However, other changes are proposed and can be found at the link for current projects. Next slide, please. So the first significant change that we'd like to talk about this evening is to add a new definition and a use for food trucks and coffee kiosks. The definition for food truck would be a mobile vehicle such as a van or trailer equipped with facilities to cook, prepare, and or sell food. Next slide, please. Here you can see the different land uses that we propose food trucks to be allowed. They would not be allowed in most of the residential zoning districts, but would be allowed in the most dense residential zoning district, and would be allowed in our commercial districts, the downtown, and our industrial districts, and the public lands district, and the airport. Again, as questions come up, you can use that chat feature. Next slide, please. Another significant change proposed is to include mobile recycling facilities. A definition and a use is proposed. The definition for mobile recycling facilities would be a movable station designed for the collection of recoverable materials such as glass, newspaper, metal, and plastic. Next slide, please. So mobile recycling facilities are proposed to be permitted in our most dense residential district, in our commercial districts, in the downtown, and in our industrial districts, the public lands and institution district, and in the airport. Next slide, please. Another significant change proposed is to allow mini storage facilities of 10 or fewer units. A mini storage facility is defined as a multiple enclosed storage unit, rented, leased, or owned for storage of personal property. Next slide, please. Here we have a question that has come up amongst folks that came up prior to the meeting. Right now, mini storage of 10 or fewer units is proposed to be permitted in our medium density residential district and our high density residential district. There's a question as to whether or not this should be a conditional use permit in these residential districts. It would be permitted outright in our commercial districts, the downtown, the industrial districts. It would not be permitted. It would not be permitted in the PLI district or the airport. Okay. Thank you for your comment. We'll make note. Yeah. As your comments come up, let us know what you've got in the chat feature. That's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Next slide, please. Another significant change is the inclusion of a new definition. A definition of storage facility outdoor is also proposed. Storage facility outdoor would be a parcel of land that allows outdoor storage to be rented, leased, or owned for storage of personal property such as boats, vehicles, or recreational trailers. This use would need to be placed on the use chart with an allowed zoning district. At this time, we don't have we don't have it in the use chart, but it would need to be placed there as well. Next slide, please. The next significant change proposed is that worship facilities would not be a conditional use permit in the R3. It would be proposed to be an allowed use in the R3 zoning district. Next slide, please. You see that worship facilities would be not permitted in our rural zone, but would be permitted in most of the residential districts, with an exception of a conditional use permit in our lower density residential district, and then would be permitted in our commercial districts, the downtown, this commercial light manufacturing district. It would not be permitted in the manufacturing industrial district, but it would be permitted in both in the public lands and institutional district, but not the airport. Next slide, please. The next significant change that we have to present is to bed and breakfast and short-term rentals. We updated the definition for bed and breakfast and eliminated the definition and use for country inn. I will go through the definitions in the next slide. But here we also added a definition for short-term rentals, but we have not yet added it to the use chart because we would like to have a broader community discussion. That community discussion we anticipate is one of our next steps. Next slide, please. So a bed and breakfast is a private residence other than a hotel, motel, or multiple dwelling unit with guest rooms used for temporary accommodation of guests for compensation and may serve guests and may serve meals to its guests. That comes out of Chapter 2, Title 11. Next slide, please. So what our proposal is, instead of having the country inn definition, we broke bed and breakfast in the use chart down to no more than 8 guest rooms and no more than 15 guest rooms. So you can see in the comparison of these two charts, the no more than 8 guest rooms would be a conditional use permit in several of the lower density residential districts, but the larger bed and breakfasts would not be an allowed use in the less dense residential districts. It would be the larger bed and breakfasts would be a conditional use permit in our most dense residential district, and would be the smaller of the two would be an allowed outright use in the more dense residential district. Across the board, they would be allowed in the commercial districts in the downtown, and would not be permitted in our industrial zoning districts, the public lands institutional district, or the airport.
The chat question?
Yeah, we see your question about the Barrister Sanders and the Carolina.
R3.
Go ahead, Lucy.
Those bed and breakfasts are located in the R3 district, and they were permitted with the CUP at the time.
And I don't know off the top of my head the size of those bed and breakfasts, but you can see how the smaller bed and breakfasts would be allowed, but they would be required to have conditional use permits.
At the time, the Barrister Sanders and Carolina were 8 guest rooms or fewer. They did not meet the country inn definition.
Good question. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. The next significant proposal is to eliminate the administrative services definition and to have that become part of the professional general services definition. So we're proposing to delete administrative services and to absorb that definition into the professional general services definition, as there was some confusion between the two definitions over time, and it makes sense to combine the two of them on the use chart. Next slide, please. So we do have a question here about whether or not general professional services should be an allowed use in the PLI and the airport districts. You can use the chat feature to address that question. Here we propose that general professional services would remain a conditional use permit in our medium density residential district, but would be allowed outright in the most dense residential district, and would be allowed in our commercial districts, the downtown, commercial light manufacturing, and then we have the question as to whether or not it should be in the PLI and the airport. There was general conversation about this just the other day, in that the general professional services is a use that is occurring in both the PLI and the airport. And so it might make sense to include that in those districts. If you have any comments about that, you can please place it in the chat feature. Next slide, please. The next significant change, we have a quick comment in the chat feature about what the PLI is. So PLI is Public Lands and Institutional District. Lucy could read you the definition of the PLI. While she's getting that, I'll talk about vehicle charging stations. The next significant proposal is for vehicle charging stations. So a definition is proposed and a use is proposed in the use chart. A vehicle charging station electric is a paid facility that supplies electric energy for the recharging of plug-in electric vehicles, including electric cars, neighborhood electric vehicles, and plug-in hybrids. Next slide, please.
Do you want to go to the?
Yeah, do you have the,
Yeah, PLI, to get back to your question on what the PLI district is. It provides for and applies only to public and quasi-public institutional uses and lands, and recreational, educational, and public service activities for the general benefit of the citizens of the city. So a lot of your state, local government offices, things of that nature, your some of your quasi-public nonprofits. Are there law offices at the airport? I am not aware of law offices as standalone offices out there. We can check on that if you would like for us to follow up on that.
okay, so we'll look into whether or not there are law offices at the airport. Back to the vehicle charging stations. Currently, they are proposed to be permitted in all of the use categories from residential to commercial to the downtown to our light industrial, heavy industrial, public lands institutional and zoning districts, and also at the airport. So that is the proposal currently for vehicle charging stations. Next slide, please. The next significant change identified to be proposed is to allow general retail sales on a small scale of 1,000 square feet or less. We want to encourage small neighborhood stores in the RO as a permitted use and as a conditional use permit in the R3. If this change would be supported, a change would need to be made in the supplemental requirements in chart 11.2.3 to update the B1 zoning district, which currently has some information in it allowing size restriction on some of the retail sales in B1. Next slide, please. So we propose this as a use in the use chart of general retail sales at a small scale of 1,000 square feet or less. It would not be permitted in several of the zoning districts, but would be a conditional use permit in the R3 and would then be permitted in the rest of our zoning districts, residential, commercial, downtown, light manufacturing, heavy manufacturing, and the airport. It would just not be permitted in the public lands institutional district. Okay. Next slide, please. The next significant change to go over as proposed would be the daycare facilities. Here we have cleaned up the definitions of daycare facilities. If you look at the definitions as the proposed changes to the definitions, we have proposed to remove 6 definitions and replace those definitions with 3 comprehensive definitions. This includes daycare center, daycare family home, and daycare group home. Next slide, please. So a daycare center is a place in which supplemental care is provided on a regular basis for 13 or more persons. A daycare family home is a private residence or other structure in which supplemental care is provided on a regular basis for 6 or few persons. And a daycare group home is a private residence or other structure in which supplemental parental care is provided on a regular basis for 7 to 12 persons. So next slide, please. Here you can see daycare center compared against a daycare family home, compared against a daycare group home. You can see that the smaller of the two, the daycare family home and the daycare group home, are permitted in all of the residential zoning districts and the commercial zoning districts. But a daycare center of 13 or more persons would require a conditional use permit in our residential districts, but would be permitted in our commercial zoning districts and our downtown. Daycare would be considered a conditional use permit in the commercial light manufacturing zone across the board. It would not be permitted in our MI zoning district, but it would be the daycare center of larger size would be permitted in the public lands institution district and would be a conditional use permit at the airport. Next slide, please. Utilities, major and minor. Here, there were some significant changes in terms of a new definition was added to to include communication tower. A communication tower is a non-occupied structure exclusive for a cellular-enabled mobile device site where antennae and electronic communications equipment are placed to create a cell or adjacent cells in a cellular network. This definition complies with the FCC. Next slide, please. And here we recommend allowing communication towers in our heaviest residential zoning district, our commercial zoning districts, the downtown, our industrial zoning districts, the public lands institution zoning district, and the airport. Next slide, please. All right, we are available and here for your comments. We would very much like to hear your thoughts. I don't know, Stephanie, if we've had anybody raise their hands.
No hands raised so far.
Okay. Okay. We'll give you a minute to settle in. You can either ask or provide comments or issues via the chat feature, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to be identified by the host.
In addition to the items that we presented tonight, feel free to bring up any issues you might have with the zoning uses. If you've had an opportunity to deal with our zoning in the city, and if you had any problems, any thoughts, any improvements that could be made to our use categories or the zoning districts in which they're permitted.
Okay, Kim, I see your comment about a CUP for a cell or other tower in the RO district. We can make note of that.
Why don't we go over those things again where you had questions and try to get, see if there's any preference. I know Kim has weighed in, but I don't know if anybody else has weighed in. For example, in the PLI or out at the airport, we already have MACO, as was noted. MACO, the Immigration Service, Forest Service, and several others. So maybe you can explain, staff can explain a little bit the rationale about not permitting them versus permitting them. That would be an example.
Okay. Well, we can jump back into the general professional services slide in terms of what is and is not permitted out there. Stephanie's navigating to that slide right now. You just give her a minute. There it is. So next slide, Stephanie.
One of the reasons we combined those two different definitions into one was because it seemed that a lot of the impacts associated with those two were very similar. That the difference between a private and a public office is minimal when it comes to impacts. And so we thought that putting those under one definition and one use was less confusing. We've oftentimes had people call it and confused between the two types of uses under those categories.
So to kind of further maybe restate my question, why is the proposal for not permitted in the PLI and airport? Why is that the proposal? What are the pros and cons?
I think the reason it was put that way was because general professional services, let me double check. The categories that particular use was permitted were the uses that were put on the chart. And as a discussion point, you know, whether the administrative service categories were also not permitted at the PLI. So the use chart had administrative services and general professional services not permitted in the PLI district. And so that's why it was moved forward that way. And I guess one of the questions is, should it be that way now? And I think we, as was pointed out in the chat, that there are offices, general professional services and administrative services at the airport now.
I guess to follow up on this would be to ask in the chat feature if anyone has objection to general professional services being allowed, and we can take them separately. So first, do you have any objections to general professional services being allowed in the PLI? And if you do, we can have you make comment in the chat feature. So I want to sorry, I'm reading your chat from Jason Egling. So thank you for that comment.
Do you want to read it out loud?
Do we have any other comments as to, are there any objections to allowing general professional services to be a permitted use in the public lands institutional district? Okay. So, Kim, you think that the general professional services should not be a permitted use in PLI, but should be permitted at the airport? Okay. Okay. Does anyone else have any other comments about whether or not general professional services should be allowed at in the PLI? Okay, we can go back over the PLI. Public lands and institutional, it has, Lucy can read you that definition again.
It applies only to public and quasi-public institutional uses and lands and recreational, educational, and public service activities for the general benefit of the citizens of the city.
I'm gonna unmute my mic because it's just easier for me to do that than to type with my shoulder. But to answer Rebecca's question, the general examples of general professional uses, particularly if we combine them with administrative uses, might be state offices that aren't on PLI, that aren't on state-owned property, but are also in a PLI. A state office is administrative office. Other examples would be school district office is also an administrative office. And I'm trying to call if that's in a PLI or not. Those are a couple of examples that come to mind. If there is any administrative or general professional office associated with, for example, Carroll College, which is a private and subject to zoning, or Shodair as a previous example, as a separate thing, or if that's zone PLI, and I also believe that Intermountain is zoned as PLI, and some church offices, again, are zone PLI, and some of them have just administrative services in that PLI. So those are some examples. Oh, Mark says Shodair is B2. Thank you, Mark. I got that confused with Intermountain.
I may be, can you hear me?
We can?
Yes.
It's Mike McCabe. I wanted to talk about vehicle charging stations in every area, every zoning area. The picture you show is of a vacant lot with parking spaces. And I see that as terribly detrimental and unattractive to a lot of residential areas.
Could Stephanie go back to that picture?
Is this the picture you were referring to, Sharon?
Well, ask Mr. McCabe if that's the picture he's using.
Yeah, yes, that's the picture.
Okay.
And my biggest concern about it is in the neighborhood, it would provide an opportunity for a lot of unknown vehicles or non-residents to appear in that neighborhood solely for the purposes of charging their vehicles. And I don't think that it's consistent with the idea of public safety and quiet enjoyment of a neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we can't hear you.
So, Rebecca had a comment too.
Yeah. This would be for a standalone use, correct? Not just if a homeowner wanted a charging station on their residential property. That's correct. It would be for, as the definition states, a paid facility that's for electric cars, plug-in electrical vehicles. not just if a homeowner wanted a charging station. That would be an allowed use for the residential zoning district. Now from Kim, different categories for residents versus broader uses in other districts, but agree with Mike's concerns in a residential use. Stephanie, can we advance the slide to the use chart? That's it. Thank you. So, and then Rebecca, you have stated, should it mirror a parking lot use chart, then that's a good suggestion. That'd be something for us to discuss.
And to maybe impart to Rebecca's point, yes, a resident, it would not fall under a vehicle charging station, because in the definition, if I recall, it says paid space. So I at my home could set up a vehicle charging station. And for that matter, I live on a cul-de-sac. And if we weren't charging, but we just set one up for the neighbors, and we all agreed to pay the cost of that charging station, then that would not be a vehicle charging station. So that's one thought. The other thought is putting a vehicle charging stations in the parking garage, and whether we're going to differentiate between them and other parking spaces because we want to cover the cost of the electricity. That would be another example. I hope that might help some people better understand the issue.
And this evening, the point of this evening is to solicit your comments and your concerns so that we can further work on the issues. So we don't have to have a final answer for the concern right now, but we just want to make sure that we vet the issues and we understand the concerns that you do have. Do we want to continue talking about vehicle charging stations, or is there another concern or question? Kim, you have a comment that Missoula has a charging station in its Front Street garage. Might be worth checking with them. That's a good idea. We can follow up with Missoula.
Hillary, did you or Lucy have a couple other questions in a couple other places, and did you want to go back to those? I thought you had a couple other places that you had questions.
Yeah.
About CUP or not CUP, for example, the storage units in residential areas. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that or if that's an issue or not, so.
Sure. Stephanie, can you go back to the mini storage slide, please? Okay.
And we did have a couple of comments regarding that. One was they preferred the CUP for a storage unit in any residential district, and I think Mark seconded that.
Yeah, next slide, Stephanie. So our question here was, should the proposed use be a conditional use permit in the R3 or the RO zoning districts? Right now it's proposed that this 10 or fewer units would be a permitted use in the R3 and the RO. Let me move the chat so I can see what you guys are saying.
Did we have a definition? I thought we had one for outside storage.
We do, that's the next slide.
And maybe if anybody cares, and if they don't, that's fine too, may want to comment, and maybe you keep that zoning district chart up to talk about whether or not, what districts would they want outside storage like RVs in to kind of give you some guidance when putting that together in the land use chart. And maybe they don't.
This is Mike McCabe. I just assumed they were in the outside the city limits.
All right.
Okay, so Rebecca, you agree with the CUP in residential for mini storage. So the R3 zoning district would require a conditional use permit. Also, the RO, are you saying both?
About R1, R2. So to clarify, when you say in residential, does that include R1, R2 in addition to R3 and RO and RU?
Sorry, I'm just going to unmute for a minute. Just the ones where it is currently permitted. Change that to CUP.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Kim, the RU district is our residential urban district. It's one of our newer zoning districts. It allows primarily higher density, single and two family use, or two dwelling uses, and some limited commercial. So it does not allow, if I recall, multifamily with a CUP, but it's entirely intended for like single family, or if you have townhouses on separate lots, that would also be an example of that type of use. The open OSR is our open space, I think, recreation zoning district. The city passed a zoning district outside its city limits, and that kind of governs the uses outside the city limits. However, state law does not allow us to enforce it for 3 reasons. One is we can't issue building permits outside the city limits, so it's very hard, if almost impossible, to keep track of permitted uses. Secondly, the city cannot do what's called extraterritorial zoning if the county has a growth policy or if the county has subdivision regs, and the county has both. So while we still have an OSR district, it's functionally a non-functioning district. I hope that helps.
So we have a comment about charging stations. That's some good information. And thanks for joining our meeting. We appreciate you being here. Kim, are you saying NP for those 2 districts being OSR and RU? Okay. Okay. If we have other comments about mini storage of 10 or fewer units, we can get to those. Did we want to talk at all about bed and breakfast? Or did we already address that question?
Wasn't there one on the, is there storage units in the city, outdoor storage in the city?
Oh,
There was a
yeah.
question.
Do we want to talk about what districts should we allow outdoor storage? You want to go to the next slide, Stephanie? So we have, oh, yeah, that one. Outdoor storage would be a parcel of land that allows outdoor storage to be rented, leased, or owned for storage of personal property such as boats, vehicles, or recreational trailers. Is there
If
any?
you scroll up, I think there is a question on if there is some in the city. There.
Rebecca, you asked, are there outdoor storage facilities in the city now?
I think there may be some outdoor storage associated with the indoor storage units. The one by Nature Park. Does that allow, Sharon, do you recall if that storage facility by Nature Park allows outdoor storage? I thought it did.
I think most of the storage facilities that are in the city right now have some element of outside storage. Most frequently, you'd see what's stored in outside storage generally is boats, RVs, similar types of vehicles. This is different than a contractor's yard. This is if I can rent and put my boat and my RV in Lucy's backyard. If she had a big backyard.
Yeah, there's an outdoor storage facility on North Benton, but I don't know that that's in this, it's right out here. I don't think it's in the city,
By the, yeah, no.
right
it's
out
not.
here.
By is that Shades of Green?
It's right by the church.
Oh, that one.
Mhm,
There's two in that general area.
mhm.
Both are in the county.
Yeah,
But I do believe there's some in the city that are associated with storage units. So getting back to what districts might allow by right with CUP of just an outdoor storage without storage units, the enclosed units. For example, the U-Haul, where the old Kmart does not have outdoor storage at this time. Should that be a separate use with separate requirements?
That-
And if so, what district should be permitted or a conditional use permit or not permitted? Do we have?
Okay, so Mark, for outdoor storage, you would recommend NP in all zones except for a conditional use permit in the CLM and the MI, much like mini storage already. Okay, we'll make a note of that. Okay, so NP in all except CLM. Okay, Rebecca, you second that?
Okay. Because those are currently permitted, so making those CUPs. So basically the same uses permitted, not permitted as the mini storage facility, except that currently that's permitted in the CLM and MI and make that a CUP.
Yeah, I think we've got consensus on that.
Okay.
That's helpful, thank you. Okay. Do we have further discussion of mini storage or outdoor storage facilities? Did anyone need to talk again about bed and breakfasts? Is there any other comment there? Okay. What about any other questions that we haven't addressed at this time? Did we address all your concerns? Stephanie, will you go to the second to the last slide? Oh, wait, stop.
Was it
Will you go back to the small scale? Yep.
this one?
That one. Thank you. Rebecca, you'd like to suggest we consider a CUP for small scale retail in RU? That's zoned
Okay.
RU and, okay. Stephanie, will you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so for small scale, 1,000 square feet or less, we want that to be a conditional use permit in the RU.
I agree with that thought, because historically, in a lot of the RU areas, and also in a lot of residential areas, we had the situation where we had small grocery stores, and they provided a convenience and service to the people in the neighborhood who could walk to the store versus have to drive somewhere to get their goods. I think there's a good opportunity there to develop the neighborhood concept.
Okay. Good, thank you.
And I apologize for not chatting, but I have no idea how to chat.
So you would prefer it as a CUP instead of outright permitted?
I think a CUP would give the benefit to the neighborhood to respond to how they wanted it as well.
Okay, just checking.
Okay. Do we have other issues or concerns or comments? Mark, you like a CUP for the small scale commercial? We'll make note of that.
I'm gonna unmute for a question that seems easier to speak than type. On food trucks,
Sure.
we had not permitted in any residential zone, if I'm remembering right. And my question was just about, I think something that the city has promoted in the past is kind of a neighborhood block party type event that someone could get a permit for. And so I was just wondering, would someone be able to get a food truck for an event like that in their residential neighborhood if they are not normally permitted in those zones?
Good question.
Yeah,
We
great
hadn't,
question.
we hadn't thought of that. It's certainly, yeah, well, let's go back. The reason why we were looking at not having food trucks in residential areas is because we don't allow restaurants in residential areas and those types of food service. So we were trying to create some kind of equity there. But I don't know, do we allow food trucks at a block party?
I don't know that they always ask.
Well, yeah. So I think that's something, since we don't necessarily have an answer to everything tonight, that we bring that question back and explore it a little bit more. I hear what you're saying, and just the other night I heard the ice cream.
Yeah.
So that would be a food truck.
It would, and the permit would probably be more of like a temporary type of a permit than a land use.
Yeah, that's kind of, yes. Unlike coffee kiosks, which aren't as movable.
Right.
So
All right.
what, oh, excuse me.
No, go ahead.
Maybe let's explore this a little further, and then maybe next when the zoning commission meets, and that we could talk about that before we wrap up. Next they meet, that'd be something we can explore.
Okay. Yeah. Kim, we'll make note of your comment as well that a food truck should be a temporary or a CUP to allow, but not guarantee their use for a block party. There are other uses similar to, I mean, the block party itself, sort of how is that permitted?
Yeah, well, block party is not considered land use.
Right. Okay. Do we see any other comments, concerns, or things that you'd like to address this evening? So Stephanie, can I have you go to the second to the last slide, please? And while I'm talking, if you come up with another concern or issue, we're happy to go back. We have the chat and the Zoom feature for some time more here, but if we don't hear any other comments or issues in the chat feature, I just want to let you know what the next steps will be. The next steps will be that the process will go back to the Zoning Commission. The next Zoning Commission meeting that I think would be available would be August 11th. I think that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. So it would be, but we'll get that date correct. So the next process, we would go back to the Zoning Commission and further discuss and make sure that we have definitions matching everything in the use chart and the use chart matching everything in the definitions. We do intend to move these materials forward with a public hearing sometime in the fall of 2020. So we are looking to get it to a public hearing with the Zoning Commission and then get it before City Commission. I don't see anything in the chat feature. Next slide, please. Just to let you know that we will also accept comments after the meeting by email or phone. You can email either myself or Lucy. My email is htaylor@helenamt.gov. Or you can call me at my direct line at 447-8448. Or you can call the main line at 447-8490. And of course, we're happy to accept comments and discuss the definitions or the proposed changes to the land use chart if you have comments after the meeting. Okay, I just see Kim, that you're not likely available for the August meeting. Okay. Any other comments in the chat feature? Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for taking time out of your evening to discuss this with us tonight. It's been very helpful. We're hopeful that we'll be bringing a good product forward. So thank you again for your time. And we will be following up on the current projects page on the website with next steps. And we'll be following up with the Zoning Commission. So if there are no further comments in the chat feature, we'd like to thank you again and say have a good evening.
Good evening. All right. Stephanie, before you close the meeting,
Yes.
is the chat also recorded, or is there some way to print out the chat?
You know, I believe it is recorded. I think it's downloaded as a separate file. But what I could do is I could I'll stop sharing and I'll just screenshot this and send it over in an email to you just for backup. Let's see here. Where's the chat now? There it is. Okay, one moment. Just gonna scroll to the top here.
Dot, to
Yeah,
save chat.
I took notes, but it was, I'm not sure I got everything.
I would, somehow there must be, if, because I was listening to the city commission meeting before I hopped on, and Danae and the mayor, no, actually the mayor reminded everybody that all their comments, whether it be in chat or raised hand, would be part of the public record.
Yes, and I believe that it automatically records it, but it takes, I think it usually takes a little bit for it to get all the way done, but just to be sure, I'm gonna screenshot it, yeah. But let's see here. Okay. I'm almost done. All right, so the last one was 1.
Anyone can do it.
Where you get,
I don't know where you click the dot.
mine has a dot. I don't see it on this one. When I do it at home, I have a little dot that has a bunch of other, where you can change your
Where it says
background and
more.
you
Yeah,
can do a bunch of other stuff. But I don't see it here.
I don't know what this does. Should I push it?
Sure, I don't think that's it, but
Chat.
yeah. Again, mine at home has that dot that she's
Oh,
referring
it
to.
says save chat. How do I save it? Chat saved, show in folder. Meeting saved, chat. Where did it save it to though?
And
Might be your downloads, maybe. I did create a Word document with a minute though. So I'm sending these right now.
that would be helpful. Because in a Word document, it might be a little easier to cut and paste or to.
Yeah, and they're actually, so they're in a Word document, Lucy, but they're screenshots in a Word
Oh,
document.
so it's like a PDF, or not even, it's like a picture.
Like a picture, yeah.
Well, we still captured it. I think everybody did a great job. I mean, I think it was worth the time to do it. And so are we going to send out another draft with some proposed changes, or are we going to have the zoning commission talk about them as a group?
There is, I believe that there is a petition to allow work sessions. They're to amend before city commission. That would allow.
I have the ability to figure that out, so that wasn't my question. My question was, our next meeting with the zoning commission, are we going to make additional changes? Or are we going to take what we had online and talk about the comments we had this evening?
I think I feel more comfortable taking the comments, what we had tonight, separately. We have this, and then say, as another sheet or another page, comments, proposed changes from the meeting tonight. Yeah. And have it separate instead of putting it into the chart at this point.
I think, I think we'll probably do a Zoom meeting in August. We're certainly not going to meet in person. So we can do a Zoom meeting in August. The zoning commission members seem comfortable with the format.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's plan on doing that.
Okay. And then we'll take the discussion tonight, put it on as proposed changes, but not incorporated into the master.
The petition process Hillary was talking about has to do with advisory boards like HPAC or ones that don't have a statutory obligation to make recommendations to the city commission. And since Thomas and I talked about this, since part of when they passed the CUP, if you recall, we did tell everybody we would look at land use changes and definitions as part of that CUP process, if you recall.
Mhm.
Then he was okay with us doing a Zoom meeting on this.
Okay. Well, then we'll go ahead and set that up and just present what we talked about tonight and anything else that comes up.
And then we also, and I think with that Zoom meeting, we also notify the same characters, or the same groups that we notified for this meeting, just so they're aware that that work session is taking place. And if they want to observe it or make public comment, they can do that then too.
Yeah. I don't think you can get to the H. Unless that's the H.
I need a Word document. Oh, let me open a Word document.
I don't know, this is so. You should just open a Word document and say new page.
So, well, unless everybody, do we have anything else we want to talk about or need to follow up on?
I don't.
Not that I can think of. Thank you, Stephanie. Very, very.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was cake. You guys did a great job.
Ooh, and
Thank you.
Stephanie, I just remembered I forgot to do my time card. I'm gonna hop on via PN and do that now, and then I'll be in later in the morning to
Sign them all.
approve them.
Okay.
Sign on them, yeah.
I think what I'll do, Sharon, I think I'll probably enter them and then get everything ready and printed, and I'll just put them in your inbox for your signature if you don't mind
I
walking
don't
them down
mind,
to
no.
finance. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I want to watch the Lewis and Clark Public Health. They have their weekly meeting at 8:30, and I always like to watch that on Friday morning.
Sure.
So I'll be in close at 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thank you, ladies.
Yep, thank you. Have a good night, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Where do I put this?